Good evening from India. My name is Kumar. I am the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University. It is indeed my proud privilege to welcome all of you to the third day of this global virtual conference on reimagining and transforming the future of law schools and legal education. We are, of course, entering into the 30th thematic session of this conference on the theme, role of legal aid clinics during and after the pandemic. We have with us a very distinguished set of educators, leaders in their own right, who have contributed to many aspects of institution building. I have great pleasure in welcoming Professor Jenny Chapman, Executive Dean of the Nottingham Law School at Nottingham Trent University in the United Kingdom. We have with us Professor Dr. AVINASH GOVINDJEE, Executive Dean of the Faculty of Law at the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. We also have with us a very dear friend of mine, Professor NIGAM, Dean of the School of Law, BML MUNJAL University in India. We also have with us Professor AJAY Kumar PANDEY, my own colleague, who is a professor and executive director of clinical programs at Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University. I want to begin by saying that this pandemic has also reinforced the importance of pedagogies of learning. And one of the important pedagogies of learning that law schools have pioneered around the world is the need for emphasizing clinical legal education in various aspects of promoting experiential learning. Now, of course, the pandemic itself has provided with new opportunities, but also challenges as to how we can create opportunities to promote experiential learning during these times. With those words of introduction, I'm going to hand this panel over to my colleague, Professor AJAY Pandey, as he takes forward the moderating responsibility of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajkumar. Welcome, everyone. And I'm very glad that we have these three eminent panelists with us this evening. To talk about the state of legal aid clinics and clinical legal education during the time of pandemic and beyond. What is the general thinking and how things are. So I think this is going to be a very useful session because many of us who do clinical legal education in India and elsewhere have been really grappling with many challenges and issues that we are facing, and we want to develop clinical legal education amidst these challenges and various difficult situations that we are faced with. The restrictions on mobility during the lockdown have incapacitated legal aid clinics that have been working closely with social communities. Legal aid clinics run by law schools consider clinical programs to be an integral part of their mission to educate. It is through clinical legal education that students learn social conditions, understand social problems, and contribute to community services. The continuing pandemic has necessitated the need for newer ways to reach out to the communities, providing clinical legal education and extending community services. Communities and its members now need support from the legal community more than before the pandemic. For instance, the lockdown period has witnessed a sharp increase in the number of cases of child abuse and domestic violence in many households, especially rural households. The distance, especially and technologically, the communities now have with members of nearby legal aid clinics rendered it difficult for them to have recourse to remedies, whatever remedies that could be provided by the law school clinics to these community members. Certainly, lawyers and law students have a moral obligation to alleviate the burdens upon many helpless individuals. What should be the new means and mechanisms to reach out to the communities and continue clinical legal education in law schools? Many law schools have shown the determination and resilience to continue clinical legal education and clinical services through alternative means and measures. They use online platforms with the support of local administration and law and order officials to connect with the communities. the transition of judicial and legal proceedings to online portals has to a larger extent helped to support the communities, especially in the filing and hearing of matters. On the pedagogical front, law schools have started using observational methods by showing recordings of earlier engagements with communities and things like that. Whatsoever, a reimagination is needed in imparting clinical legal education during the pandemic. Apart from finding new ways and means, consideration should also be given to clinical protocols and ethics when clinics are held online. The sensitivity with which community-related matters are handled cannot be negotiated, as legal aid clinics are not just means of knowledge production, but social production in itself. Therefore, this thematic session intends to assess the role of legal aid clinics during and after the pandemic, and the way forward and such aspects. As far as various questions that we have for the panel, I think reimagining clinical legal education certainly prompts us to ask a few foundational questions. What are the primary objectives of legal aid clinics? How essential it is for students to learn community engagement by participation and immersion? What are the qualities clinical legal education can inculcate in students? Coupled with these questions, we also have questions like how the COVID-19 affected various law schools, and basically the representation from the panelists as to how their law schools responded to this situation, and what are the steps that they have taken to continue clinical legal education, and how do they envision the future. So I would pose this bunch of questions to all of you, and to begin with, I may turn to Professor Jenny Chapman. So over to you, Professor Jenny Chapman.
Thank you, Professor Pandy, and thank you so much for inviting me here today to contribute. This topic's very close to my heart, and obviously I can offer the conference a UK perspective on clinical legal education in this session. It's probably worth me just telling you a little bit about the model that we run at Nottingham Law School, because it's quite unique in the UK. So as part of our commitment to the delivery of transformational legal education and access to justice, we set up a fully regulated law firm, the Nottingham Law School Legal Advice Centre, in 2015. And this was a major milestone in the development of our pro bono advice clinic. So that had started in 2012 and had been run for a number of years. But in 2015, we decided to take it to a new level. So the Centre is an exempt charity. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of the university, and it holds an alternative business structure licence from the UK Solicitors Regulation Authority. And we modelled our clinical model really on the teaching hospital model that you'd see in a medical school. So basically, we became first of our kind when we became regulated in 2015. And I think it's quite a unique model globally too. So our purpose is twofold, as with most university law clinics. Supporting access to justice for the community is absolutely critical, whilst providing outstanding opportunities for our students to engage in meaningful legal work with real clients. And we've got a variety of models. Our students can do short placements, long placements. They do work within the curriculum and outside the curriculum. We have 10 full-time staff that work in our centre, and they oversee over 400 student volunteers. And our model has had considerable impact. So in the last 5 years since becoming a law firm, we've actually recovered over £4.5 million in compensation and benefit for our clients. And we also have evidence that it really does help our students' employability and also their grades, their academic achievement too. So we know that the clinical model really has to show students how practice may differ from the academic experience of law. And we felt that by doing this through a law firm, we could really give them the most authentic experience.
All right, thank you for these remarks. I would now like to turn to Professor Govindjee and ask him to pursue some of these questions. Professor Govindjee, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Panday, and thank you to Professor Raj Kumar and to the institution for the invitation and to be part of this panel. And it's lovely to hear what is happening at other institutions. And our experience at Nelson Mandela University, really our Faculty of Law increasingly strives to integrate our learning and teaching with not only research, but with engagement activities in particular. And it's at that point that institutions like our University Law Clinic, our Street Law Program, our Labor Law Advice Office, all of those institutions need to play an increasingly crucial role in not only giving students the real experience. Our Refugee Rights Center is another good example of this, but in actually assisting communities in ways in which they require. Allowing communities to continue to set the agenda for the type of assistance that is required by institutions like our university, and then delivering on that. And I think, you know, it's so good that we sit together and we discuss this, because I consulted with some of my colleagues who are working at the coalface at the law clinic in order to formulate some of these remarks. And the one thing that came through extremely strongly was collaboration, and how important that would be. One of my colleagues said that, you know, in the past she would advise students that the success in a clinic case would be 99% perspiration and, you know, 1% inspiration, but it's changed now, and you need to include a big percentage for collaboration. So I think there's a deep sense that the collaboration, of course, happens not only with our formal legal systems, the courts, the Chapter 9 institutions that we have, like the Human Rights Commission, but very much with the profession. We're all tied into this together, as are we as law schools. So in order to achieve better outcomes, we need law clinic associations in the country, on the continent, and internationally, as well as faculty associations, law deans associations, and we need meaningful integration with the profession and the justice system in all our countries. And failing that, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to progress when it comes to tackling some of the really drastic challenges that we are now facing in the sector worldwide. So I look forward to exploring some of these themes and also discussing potential forms of collaboration in the time we have. Thanks.
Certainly, Professor Govindjee, I think collaboration is a very important term, especially during these times. And we'll certainly like to take some time during this panel discussion to talk about collaboration in various ways, how different law schools have collaborated. I would certainly like to now turn to Professor Nigam for his remarks to the first set of questions that I posed to all of us.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Thank you, Professor Rajkumar, and a warm welcome to my fellow participants on the panel, Professor Chapman and Professor Govindjee. I'm here actually partly to talk about legal aid clinics and partly to learn from the panel and from Professor Pandey. My law school is very young. In fact, we are in our second year. I'm the founding dean of the law school. We started this law school last year as part of a larger university. The BMN MUNJAL University is well known for its engineering and management education, and then it started this law school under with me as a head last year. So we are, in some ways, for us, any talk or any discussion about legal aid and legal services clinics, futuristic. We are looking to see how we should develop this program. I want to take this opportunity to state, in accordance with what Professor Pandey was saying as well about the objectives and the way the Indian legal system has looked at education. So broadly speaking, all law schools in India have three objectives for when it comes to clinics. One is that we are looking at access to justice. So we're looking at this major issue in a developing country like India, which is that not everybody has access to justice. There are various parts, there are various members of the population who, because of some issues or the other relating to their finances or their position in life, are not able to access the justice system as others do. So that's one issue, and in a very interesting and I think quite a visionary manner, the Bar Council of India has always stressed on the point that students must get involved in these kind of issues right from the beginning, right? So that they are sensitized to the idea that there are parts of the population that don't have access to justice. Second issue, which is related to this, second objective, is to help vulnerable parts of the population. That's the reason why a lot of legal aid clinics in India focus on things like domestic violence, sexual violence against children, poverty-related crimes. So these are issues that are particularly serious for the vulnerable portions, parts of Indian society, and the legal aid clinics and legal services are meant to address those issues. And the third and third and kind of more overarching objective, which I'm sure my fellow panelists will agree with me, is that we need to develop a sense of empathy among our law students, right? I mean, it's sometimes law schools are a place where there is some kind of a gold rush towards lucrative positions and competition. And I think sometimes students just lose their idea of how to empathize with fellow human beings. And I think legal aid clinics and legal services are meant to bolster and to emphasize that aspect of the law that sometimes law students tend to forget. So it is really with these objectives that we have tried to begin our nascent and really kind of embryonic legal clinics program at my university. I'm sure we'll talk about that more as the discussion proceeds. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Nigam. Certainly, these terms are extremely important, access to justice, and I think that's a very important term, and that would surface again in the discussion. And people generally talk in terms of access to justice when it comes to clinical legal education. You have talked about help, empathy, etc., and we'll certainly take up some of those aspects. I would certainly now turn to the part on collaboration. I think the question would be: do you think that legal aid clinics of law schools should collaborate through clinical consortiums? A point that Professor GOVINDJEE stressed. During these times to upscale the benefits of pooling in resources. Has your law school taken such or similar measures? If yes, what benefits have such collaborations yielded, and what is the way forward? How would you see collaborations and their importance, and what are various points that you would want all of us to consider while considering collaboration and collaborative approaches? So I can quickly turn to Professor GOVINDJEE, since you mentioned a bit about collaboration. So we would like to hear from you, Professor GOVINDJEE. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pandey. And I think this really hits the nail on the head as far as we are concerned. And I think it's a deep type of collaboration that we are seeking. This is not the type of collaboration that can be achieved through a set of formal agreements or something imposed from a central authority. So the type of collaborations are those that come from the ground up. They are based in the first instance on the networks that the practitioners that are staffing the clinic have. It's based on their relationship with the courts in which they appear. It's based in their innovativeness in pursuing new ideas, such as increasing the role of mediation in dispute resolution. And it's really the people on the ground that set the tone in terms of the collaborative attitude that they instill and inspire not only in their staff, but in the students. that are then servicing the law clinics. So I think it starts from there. And in order to get to the next level, I also believe that there needs to be a very, very close collaboration with the faculty and the university, which is housing the clinic. In our case, Professor NIGAM may be interested. Our law clinic is not located at the place where our core faculty of law is. It's located in the heart of the community, or one of the communities that has the biggest need for these services on our Mission Vale campus, some 20, 25 kilometers away from where the faculty of law is. So on the one hand, then, the type of collaboration that is required is also with the immediate community that is served by the clinic. On the other hand, you need big law firms. You need institutions with resources to come on board and to back the activities of what the faculty and the law clinic are trying to do in terms of enhancing the access to justice, again, that Professor NIGAM spoke about. And there's one initiative that is uppermost in our minds at the moment, is an initiative called Law Lab that we are pioneering with one of the big law firms in South Africa. And in a nutshell, it involves bringing the type of technology that the big law firms are using in order to improve their case management and to digitalize their services to their clients. And it's based on the principle that that type of technology shouldn't be restricted only to big law firms operating out of Johannesburg. There's no reason why a law clinic located in Mission Vale in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, shouldn't have access to the same technology in order for students to be able to access and be comfortable with that technology in anticipation of their future role in practice, but more importantly, perhaps, for the clients that the law clinic is being served to have the benefit of enhanced and improved legal services as a result of the implementation of that technology. So that's an example of the type of collaborative approach, which of course needs some experimentation and some modeling in order to then be rolled out to other clinics. But that's the type of initiative, I think.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can offer another layer of that perspective. I absolutely agree that collaboration with law firms and enabling law firms to contribute to a pro bono activity in the community, we can be an important platform to enable that. But we have another layer of collaboration too, and that's with other charities and other advice agencies. So we work with some other UK charities, Personal Support Unit, which supports litigants in person at court, and also the Free Representation Unit that represents clients at tribunal. So our infrastructure includes those collaborations. So we enable our students to work with those organisations to provide them with support and also support and provide resource to those charities. We also work with local advice agencies, so other legal aid agencies, not university ones necessarily, in the region. And in fact, we've set up our services in a way that looks at what they can't offer. And so between us, we try and complete the whole of access to justice within the region. So we have referrals from those various citizen advice bureaus and advice agencies to us. And equally, we refer back when clients come to us that we can't help because that's not within our expertise. So we find that that network is incredibly important in supporting access to justice in a more holistic way within the community. So absolutely, you shouldn't work in a silo as a university legal aid service. You are part of that wider community. The last thing I would just add quickly is we also operate as a LawWorks clinic. So in the UK, LawWorks is a charity that encourages and is a network for pro bono lawyers. So we work as part of that network as well, work with their regional officer. And again, we find that an incredibly useful way of connecting with others across the UK in terms of a service where access to justice is needed.
All right, thank you, Professor Chapman. I would certainly like to talk about technology, and there are several questions related to technology as to how can legal aid clinics utilize technology to reach out to the communities during and after the pandemic. Some might say that we could imagine a virtual legal aid clinic which empanels lawyers on a pro bono basis to interact with the needy, to understand their issues and give advice. Is this viable? What can be done to realize this vision? Do you foresee the continued use of technology post the pandemic to scale the impact through virtual legal aid clinics? So, Professor Chapman, would you like to pursue this question?
Yes, thank you, Professor Pandy. So when COVID-19 hit in March this year, we just moved our services online. So previously, they had mainly been centered around clients coming into our centre for face-to-face advice and meetings, and our outreach, which involved us physically going out into the community. The latter has been harder to replicate. So obviously for lots of reasons, and I'm sure the other panelists will have a perspective on this too, that outreach program has been more inhibited post-COVID. But our advice and representation service has continued. So we had a short gap where we moved very quickly online. But what we have found actually is that it's been more inclusive. So we've offered more one-off advice by telephone and online to clients. We've seen a big demand for that. And it has actually meant that clients that perhaps would struggle more to attend on, at our centre have been able to get advice that they need. Equally, our student volunteers, we found it more inclusive. So students with caring responsibilities, part-time jobs or commuting, who perhaps couldn't dedicate the time in the centre before because of those factors, actually have been able to, become part of our student volunteer group because there's more flexibility in delivery online. So we always thought we would go online, and we've been talking about it for a while, and then we found that we would move very quickly to have to do it, and it's worked incredibly well. So we will carry on with it. We had to adjust some of our sort of security around that, obviously, with client confidentiality, and make sure our IT systems are really robust about how we did that. But we worked through that. That was fine. The only other angle I'll add just on technology too is that since COVID-19, a lot of our students have had their placements cancelled. So, they've gone out into work placements and those have been cancelled. So we set up a virtual internship project that we've run through the centre as well. So that allows students to do about a week's work of internship with us, all online. And that has been incredibly successful too. It's not the same as doing a week work placement in the office, I get that, but actually we've shown it has a lot of value. So it's a model that we are actually going to carry on with and enhance as we go through the coming months.
Thank you. Possibility or viability of a virtual legal aid clinic vis-a-vis community service or an outreach directly to the community and working with community members. So how does one go about it? Professor Govindjee, you have any thoughts on some of these questions?
Thanks very much. I think our experience has been slightly different from Professor Chapman. We haven't been able to go completely online in the sense that we've turned the clinic into something that now operates completely and exclusively in the digital space. But what we have managed to do is to take core services online by modifying an approach so that clients who would have otherwise attended the law clinic and continue to do so, seeking assistance, can now be sent through and dealt with in a safe, COVID-safe way, and can then connect using a computer system that is on that particular campus of the university, and then be linked with the candidate legal practitioners that could be operating safely from their home. So it's happened in that type of way up to now, and likewise the clinical legal education has been modified, not quite in the form of a virtual internship, but rather a full-on exposure to the type of pleadings, drafting of documents, presentation of opinions and cases And technology has been instrumental in enabling that to happen together with the assessment. So the staff of the clinic would now upload a lecture explaining the basics, or a video explaining the basics of what would be required for a particular set of legal pleadings. And students could then access that. And I must say, just as an aside, the entire completion of the academic year at our university has been aided by the university pooling resources, even with the mobile service providers. So we've had a rollout of laptop computers, loan laptop computers, data, which you can imagine in areas of our country that previously was completely unthinkable. And I agree with Professor Chapman. It's really propelled us into the type of education that we at least partly would have dreamt of. But the final point perhaps to make is that I know my colleagues who work at the clinic still long for that ultimate face-to-face interaction. And I think particularly when we talk about mobile law clinics and other outreach initiatives, that just simply is very, very difficult to replicate or replace at this stage using technology.
Thank you. I think this is an area that requires us to innovate and experiment with new ways and new aspects. And there would certainly be also questions about what is there for the regulators in terms of policies and new aspects that they need to have in place. So before I turn to Professor Nigam, and certainly I have a set of questions about compassion, sensitivity, emotional intelligence, etc. And I quickly would want to really learn from all of you. What is the kind of assistance or help that you may have envisioned or you may have needed on the part of regulators in terms of policy changes, etc. So would you like to take this question, Professor Govindjee?
No, thank you very much. The question comes at a very good time in the South African setting, because we have a new Legal Practice Act and a Legal Practice Council that is now, for the first time, a single regulatory body regulating what in the UK would be both the solicitors and the barristers. Both the attorneys and the advocates are now considered to be legal practitioners in terms of this act, and candidate legal practitioners need to comply with a set of requirements prior to admission. And of course, one of the key proposals that then found its way into the legislation relates to community legal services, as well as then continuing professional development and pro bono involvement. And it's the community legal services component that still requires consultation with the minister. But it's leading to, I think, a lot of interesting discussion in terms of the forms that type of community service could take. And there are different views on this also, because the period of articles of clerkship or pupillage differs in respect of the attorneys and the advocates. So there are a number of interesting possibilities, but also the manner in which the collaboration that we spoke about earlier, in other words, would it be that government departments, for example, would open up their doors to enable community legal services to occur so that the state machinery could be used at all the different spheres of government? To what extent will the type of networks that Professor Chapman spoke about earlier, and filling the gaps and seeing it as a whole, to what extent could those network legal aid clinics, not only university ones, but the Legal Aid Board of South Africa, to what extent could they be mobilized? But ultimately, it's also it raises such important issues from the perspective of a system where the university is producing in 4 or 5 years law graduates. The law clinic work that we've been speaking about up to now is part and parcel of what we have, which is an undergraduate 4-year degree. There are 5-year options, and we're now talking about once students graduate and are on their way to entering the profession, what would be the obligations? And I think to answer your question as best I can at this point, Prof. Panday, I think we do need, sooner rather than later, more certainty in terms of the forms of community service post-university that would meet the statutory requirements that we now find in the Legal Practice Act. And that is very much, I think, on the agenda for the next year or two. The first Legal Practice Council of South Africa will end its the 3-year term in November next year. And I would imagine that by then, the type of engagements with the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development would have taken place to enable us to give some content to your question.
Thank you, Professor GOVINDJEE. So I'll now turn to Professor Nigam, and on the question of policies and regulations from the Bar Council of India and things like that, to the question of compassion, sensitivity, emotional intelligence, and these questions. When it comes to compassion, sensitivity, emotional intelligence questions, I think apart from the larger questions on how to deal with the new times, do you think the current crisis has led to situations hitherto not experienced and which would require a lot more empathy while dealing with cases of individuals from marginalized community? Do you think dealing with such cases would require more compassion and sensitivity and emotional intelligence? If so, how should we train students to deal with such situations?
Yes, thank you for that question. The COVID crisis has struck all of us across the divide, across the poverty, the financial divide, across the gender divide. And what has happened is that there's an increasing appreciation of the fact that we are all in this together, that unless we face this crisis as a community, this crisis will not go away, and in fact will exacerbate whatever problems were there before the crisis. India, as you know, is one of the worst affected countries because of the COVID crisis. And we could see in the early days of the COVID crisis itself, how certain sections of the population, namely the laborers and the migrants, were particularly affected by the COVID crisis and the lockdown. Because of that, I think our law students in particular have had an increasing appreciation of the kind of sheer imbalance between the poor and the rich in India when it comes to access to justice on the one hand, and access to services on the other hand. In addition to this, there is an appreciation of the fact that there is a huge digital divide in India. We have seen that in the way education is being conducted in schools run by the government as compared to schools run by private institutions. So once again, we see in the context of the provision of legal services that on the one hand, you have these deepening divisions between the well-off and the not so well-off. And associated with that, complementary to that, the problem of the digital divide, that access to justice has in fact become harder in some ways for the poor and for the people who are not technologically able to access these services. In this situation, I'll end by saying that this issue of emotional intelligence and compassion that we are talking about, it actually arises in very interesting ways. So far, for example, which is fairly typical, I think, of law schools in this crisis, all the law schools, including mine and yours, are still in touch with our local district services authorities. And we have had several talks from both the judicial officers and the other legal officers on the rolls on legal services. But these talks have been online so far, obviously, because we are not able to meet. I think I envisage in the future that law schools will have to be slightly proactive now in trying to figure out how in these times we should ensure that our students continue to participate in legal services clinics. One avenue, and I'll end by saying this, one avenue is online mediation and arbitration. There's an example of that already. The National Law School Bangalore has an online arbitration center that has worked quite well, and it used to work quite well even before the COVID crisis. It was set up in order to ensure that they could go beyond the traditional ideas of mediation and arbitration. And I think we should now take that forward. I think other law schools should take it forward and see if we can do something proactive in this area. And I think, and I'm just giving this as an example. So I think we need to figure out proactively, how do we engage in this era where we are not able to do the traditional means, and we are faced with a huge digital divide. The community that we want to serve is a community that is not now able to access the technology needed for us to serve them. And so we need to figure that out going forward. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. There's a very pertinent question about all of us, and most of us certainly, being in a situation of work from home. And how do we really work out a clinical program, or how do we do clinical legal education, where most of us are working from home, students are staying at home, learning from there. So any thoughts on that? I think if each one of you can take a minute and reflect on this aspect. So maybe Professor Chapman, you could go first, please.
Thank you, Professor. So one thing we've noticed in terms of working in the centre, but also working more generally, and I'm sure you and my co-panelists would agree, is that the isolation and the inability to have informal conversations. So we're all spending our time perhaps online with lots of meetings, but they usually have a formal focus, a discussion, and then you straight off to your next meeting. So we've done, and we realized really early on that that was impoverishing the student learning experience and potentially the staff experience too. So we've set up some more informal kind of forums online for our students in the Legal Advice Centre, and that's through our Student Pro Bono Committee. So this an informal drop-in where they can almost decompress or just discuss things more generally or socially, but not just socially, it could be related to work. And we've also done the same for staff. So we've just sort of coded meetings. This is a drop-in, a decompression time. Come and let's just talk about things that are either worrying us or blue skies thinking. So I think we've had to really make an effort on that, where it would have happened naturally when we were all on campus and bumping into each other. The other thing we found with our students is that it's obviously that soft skill development is utterly critical and part of clinical legal education. That's a key reason why we do it. You know, inculcating their ethical values, their ability to deal with difficult situations with clients, to be resilient if they lose a tribunal case or they have a difficult client. And although we are continuing all our services online, it's no doubt more challenging if you're not in a room with a client, or it's a telephone hearing as opposed to a physical hearing, for you to get a better sense of those skills. So we've put a bit more online induction, and the other thing that we've done is we've brought in some of our professional lawyers to do talking head videos, just to give them a bit more of a wider experience, just to get them thinking about those other angles. And then obviously we're all hoping that, you know, at some point in the spring, they will be back on campus and we'll be able to do more work with them on this side. It is a challenge though, but I think we have found some limited ways to move forward on that.
Thank you. Professor Govindjee, over to you.
Thanks, Professor Pandey. It's similar, I think, to the type of input that Professor Chapman has given. It has been the feedback from, for example, our Refugee Rights Centre and our Labour Law Advice Office that, you know, they really need to keep doors open as far as possible while maintaining safety protocols. And it's because of the lack of technological access that Professor NIGAM was was talking about. So there is still a significant part of the people that we're serving who require a type of walk-in service in order to then be aided. So it's been a careful balancing act between trying to keep doors open in a safe way, while then also doing what I spoke about earlier, which is streaming clients to then computer devices so that they can then obtain their information virtually. In respect of the classes that are being taught to the undergraduates, it was also complex, and none of this is simple, but initially we also had to keep things data light. I mentioned the great support of free data, but we realized very soon that watching a long video or even a voice-over PowerPoint, if you use certain applications, use more data than might be the case if there was a shorter voice note using different programs. So it's been learning the hard way. We also had to grapple initially with the disparity among some students, of course, who have full access, multiple devices, and those who are in other areas. And it's not only access to devices and data that's a problem, it's a connectivity challenge. So we had to be sensitive about that when we made decisions about communicating with classes on WhatsApp groups and things like that. But suffice to say that has, in a sense, settled. A number of we took an approach that is, I wouldn't say necessarily a hands-off approach, but one which allowed subject lecturers to do what they felt would be the best way. Some connected more actively with their classes. Others did so more in written format, in more formal mechanisms, and we've slowly established a baseline of what we feel is appropriate. And slowly, as the system has matured, so we're finding more and more interaction among students and between indeed students and their lecturers using platforms such as WhatsApp, with MS Teams and Zoom then being used in a tutorial type of Q&A basis, but certainly not a perfect science in terms of all of that.
There is an aspect of community legal literacy or community legal empowerment and such aspects, community education, community hand-holding, reaching out to them, etc. Community education itself. Now, the question would be, and there are two related questions, and I'll turn to Professor Nigam first for that question. The question is that certainly Professor Govindjee has mentioned about WhatsApp groups, etc. And this is something that we have also tried. We have tried to have a lot of community volunteers in some of the villages that we work in around the law school. So that's one thing. Then there could be other technological tools as well, which can be of immense help when we think in terms of reaching out to communities in a way that there is a process of their education, legal literacy, legal empowerment, etc. And then there is a connected question that has also posed by a listener who is watching and listening to this panel discussion, and that is about personal protection equipment, PPE. That is something that is used by people who go out in the community, work with them and things like that. So have law schools really thought about it, and what is the vision is your law school, Professor Nigam, to begin with, is thinking along these lines, and what is your take on that?
Thank you. I mean, I've quite a few points mentioned in your question. Let me see if I address all of them. So the first thing is community literacy and engagement. And, those are the kind of things that my students get very excited about. They're in their first and second year. They may not be able to give advice very clearly, but they love to participate in community engagement programs. So last year and early this year, they went and they performed skits in villages, sensitizing people to the Right to Education Act, to issues of domestic violence, and they enjoyed that whole process. And at the same time, they also participated in these awareness issues that you and I are talking about. Now, unfortunately, you can't perform skits in villages during the pandemic. And doing skits online is difficult, right? So it's we are facing that issue of community engagement and literacy, and we are still trying to work through it. We don't know, we haven't come to an effective solution, really. In terms of your, the question that you asked, one of the listeners was talking about PPE suits and masks. There's a part of the university, not the law school, but the engineering part, that actually very curious and interested in these issues. They've in fact developed masks indigenously at the university to help the government in ensuring that it's distributed in an inexpensive manner among the local communities. So we are helping out that way, because we have a technological aspect to our university that's been there for quite some time. But the law school itself, it's really, we are still searching for solutions. I think, the online mediation part that I mentioned, I think that is something going ahead, might be something worth exploring.
Right, thank you. Professor Chapman, would you like to pursue some of these questions?
Yes, so our campus has stayed open from September with COVID-19 secure status, which means that we're socially distancing with masks, hand sanitizers, etc. So we have actually seen a couple of clients in our centre because they had no access to IT, and they weren't able to come in, and we were allowed to do that. But generally in the UK, it's about essential travel only, and obviously it's one thing to put on a outreach thing in a COVID secure hall, say, but people have got to get there and they might have to travel on public transport. So there's a lot of complications around that. So we have really just focused on what we would see as our essential legal advice service and the public legal education side of it. And our students, and like my co-panelists, we have really keen students that really love doing that kind of work, and it tends to be driven actually by the students' ideas. We're not really in a position to deliver that at the moment. So I think that has been the biggest challenge and the biggest impact, and probably will be an unseen impact for a while yet. That will have quite a long tail, because if we're not getting into schools to talk to school children about human rights, if we're not getting into communities to talk about their legal rights with domestic abuse or whatever, we're missing a whole group of people, and there could be quite a long time before we can recover back from that public legal education piece. We see it as so important, but we're not really very enabled to deal with it at the moment, just in the exact moment we're facing.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Professor Chapman. I'll turn to Professor Govindjee, and here's a question from the audience. And the question is that courts and tribunals in many countries are yet to resume operations in their full capacity. How are legal aid clinics managing to redress client concerns without adequate, timely support from state institutions? Would you like to pursue that question, Professor Govindjee?
Sure. Thanks for that, Prof. Panday. In South Africa, there have been court directives that have been issued, which in a sense have been designed to ensure that the day-to-day businesses of our courts can continue, of course, with some adaptation. So in most of the jurisdictions, it would only be in really essential cases where the parties would require that they appear in person before a presiding officer. In other cases, the hearings have been occurring on platforms such as these, and we in fact also now have the specter of recordings of the court cases appearing on platforms such as YouTube. So in a sense, I suppose there's been an enhancement of access to information about our court processes, and hopefully with minimal disruption in terms of the access to court dimension. Just to pick up finally on the point of education and community education, it might be interesting for colleagues to note that we actually alternate. It's a year-long clinical law module, but it's alternated every week with a street law component, which is focusing completely on human rights education and integrating the education component with the practice component. But that's something perhaps we can pick up after the conference. Thanks.
Right. So I would now come to the question of your advice, actually. What advice would you have for students, and of course, advice for law schools, especially those law schools who would not have those technology tools which some other law schools may be using for more effective clinical legal education? So advice to law schools, and then of course advice to law students as to what kind of route they should be taking in terms of whether they could be litigation or representations before appropriate authorities, etc. We can, I think I'll turn to Professor Chapman for this question first, and this set of questions actually. Yeah, over to you, Professor Chapman. Yes.
Thank you. So I would say if you're a student and you're at a law school that doesn't have a law clinic, lobby for one. Ask your academic tutors and say, we want to set one up, support us to do this. Because I think, I think it's so important that there is that facility if students want it. And it can actually be done usually fairly simply if there's the right supervisory capacity, there's the right academic support. You don't necessarily need a whole nice building or anything. You might just need a room and an infrastructure. What you do need is someone that will help supervise you, because you need to make sure the advice you've given is correct, that the community deserves the best advice, not just the advice of students and supported. So I'd say that obviously things like insurance, you need to think that through. So you've got to do it with the university's support and make sure that your advice is covered by the university's public liability insurance or a specialist insurance. And I suppose I would say, going back to collaboration, because we've done some work with another university in the UK that doesn't have a law school, but they have a business school, and their students were advising small businesses on business structure, and we've joined up with them to give some legal advice, to their clients on that aspect. So I think collaboration could be another way forward, because you may find that joining forces could actually mean you could provide your students with a platform to advise the community. So those are my immediate thoughts, Professor Panday.
Thank you. Professor GOVINDJEE, over to you.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we are in danger of missing at the present moment through all the online forms of education and efforts at experiential learning is really what separates the education that law students have once they've been through a clinical legal education program and the type of education they have prior to entering into that year. So it's the type of listening skills, it's the type of communication skills, it's the type of getting into the shoes of the person that's sitting across the table from you. Reminds me a little bit of the old client counseling competitions that used to take place. And there was a tremendous value in students needing to go through that, even in not only in a staged form like a competition, but where you're actually dealing, in this case, with a vulnerable community member in front of you. And I think it's those soft skills, the emotional intelligence, and particularly the listening skills, the ability to keep quiet while somebody else is telling their story, even if you don't have a legal solution for them. And ultimately seeing these clients as people that you can then use your knowledge of the law and the fundamental constitutional principles on which our societies are based, and then provide assistance, not necessarily even legal assistance, but assistance which heightens the sense of human dignity that client feels. And I think we need to be careful that with all the alternatives and the technological solutions we're striving for, we don't miss that. And that, I think, would be, we would end up with an impoverished form of legal service provision in that case. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Over to you, Professor Nigam. If you can quickly give us some of your thoughts on these questions, the advice question, and then I'll turn to Professor Rajkumar to wind up this session. So over to you, Professor Nigam.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I just have two pieces of advice for law schools and one piece of advice for law students. The two pieces of advice for law schools is that it doesn't take that much to do a legal services clinic. It takes a lot of initiative and effort, but in terms of infrastructure, we have an institutional setup in India with our local district courts going all the way to the Supreme Court. So we can take advantage of that institution structure and we can really do something very interesting in this area. So that's my first advice to law schools. My second advice, collaboration. That's been the theme of the panel. We must collaborate with NGOs, with the local government structure, and increasingly with law firms. A lot of law firms post the new amendments to the Consumer Protection Act are now actually have a number of lawyers working in that area. And we should be able to, in the future, deepen that collaborations that we can do with the law firms. My one piece of advice to law students, enjoy this time. Legal Services Clinic is actually not just educational, it's enjoyable. You're able to actually bring out an experiential part of your life at law school that's seldom available. I enjoyed my legal services work and my legal aid work when I was a student. I met very different kinds of people. I made new friendships. I understood, as Professor GOVINDJEE said, I understood what it means to be in somebody else's shoes, look at issues from somebody else's perspective. Those kind of soft skills are impossible to acquire very easily. And I think Legal Services Clinic provides an excellent opportunity for students to acquire that. So enjoy it. That's my piece of advice.
Thank you very much, Professor Nigam. I think that's a wonderful advice. Thank you, Professor Chapman, Professor GOVINDJEE, Professor Nigam. Thank you, audience, and thank you, all the viewers and listeners, for your participation. I think the key term that we can all take away from this discussion is certainly collaboration, and of course, empathy, compassion. These are all important aspects. Community outreach, infrastructural support on the part of law schools, including technological support, and certainly various collaborative ways and transformative approaches, new methods, experimenting with new things. So these are some of the I think points that are important points to deliberate upon further. And I really look forward to discussing some of these points with some of the audience and of course all of you whenever we get another opportunity to do so. Thank you very much, and over to Professor Rajkumar now.
Thank you so much, Ajay. And of course, I want to say that Ajay has been spearheading the clinical legal education in India, and also has also contributed to the Global Alliance for Justice Education. We organized, we brought the many parts of the world into our campus through Ajay's initiative. So I'm very delighted that he moderated this panel. Thank you very much, Professor Chapman and Professor GOVINDJEE and Professor Nigam. This is one of those areas where we need to invest in the mindset of our students. In fact, it is quite natural that law students, many students who end up studying law today have in many ways decided to seek lucrative corporate legal careers, and even brought that imagination as the sole imagination for the pursuit of legal education. I think clinical legal education and attempts to bring in the society into the law and to the legal education is one of the salutary ways by which they can make their legal education experience meaningful. But we also know from empirical evidence that many students who end up pursuing legal education, clinical legal education, it becomes a truly transformative and life-changing experience for them. So I deeply appreciate your perspectives in all of this. Thank you so much.